Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Happy New Year to everybody who is joining us for the first PAX Americana of 2026. We've been off the last couple weeks because of Christmas and New Year's, but we are back, and I'm Julie Roginsky here with Olga Lautman. Hey, Olga.
Hi, welcome back.
Lot- It's been a crazy 2026, and we're only on day 8.
I
Uh,
know.
so I feel like we should start with Trump's imperialist ambitions. He waited until after all of his rich friends were out of the Caribbean over the holidays so that he could close down airspace in the Caribbean and go into Venezuela, which is, I guess, sort of a Russian, I don't know about protectorate, but the Russians and the Chinese certainly have spent a lot of energy and time on the Maduro regime, which I just want to be clear that they are leaving in place. I mean, they just replaced Nicolas Maduro, but they're leaving his vice president in place, his entire regime in place, I guess, in exchange for us getting some of their Venezuelan oil, which the oil companies don't seem to really want. What are your thoughts on all this, Olga? What is going on?
Well, first, to make clear your point that everything is in place. I mean, literally, it's not a regime change, it's a leadership change. They just plucked out Maduro and his wife, but everything else, the whole security system is in place. Security services and the military and the vice president, and clearly you see the retaliation that is upticking with reports of Maduro's goons, going around and stopping people. They set up checkpoints and they're stopping people checking their phone for any kind of, uh, loyalty or happiness expressed with what the US did. So, I mean, things are even worse right now for Venezuelans inside of Venezuela because of the fact that they've really, really began a crackdown.
Yeah.
Um, as far as Venezuela being Russian, proxy, they have been for a long time. They're a client state, an important client state for Russia. I saw conspiracies, over the when this happened, about a secret deal between Trump and Putin that, Trump said, take Ukraine, we'll take Venezuela, and this is how this all came out. Let me make something clear. Um, Russia doesn't have the capacity right now to keep anyone in place.
Right.
They couldn't do it in Syria when Assad fell, and this was a very important strategic, location for them and a strategic regime because of their operations in Africa. Um, can't do it with Maduro. Right now, another client state of theirs is going to fall. Iran. They can't do it with Iran. And I can tell you, I spent, um, you know, time in Russia's Telegram channels looking at the military bloggers, and I mean, frankly, I'm waiting for them to go and rip Putin out of the Kremlin, because if you saw the commentary, I mean, and this is public commentary on like, oh, this is what a special operation is supposed to look like. Oh, I can't believe that Russia, hey, call it, signed all these military agreements with Venezuela, and they're basically worth nothing. I mean, it was such critical commentary, and then we'll get into yesterday with the seizure of the ships, to the point that you actually have people. Now who propagandists for the Putin regime, who are now extremely critical and saying that he's weak and old and, and basically past his expiration date.
It's interesting because um, this kind of changes the game a little bit all over the place, right? On the one hand, I think I think a lot of this is Putin envy on the part of Trump, in the sense that, well, if Vladimir Putin gets to go in and just take over another country, then I can get to do that too. And we'll get to Greenland in a moment, but I have a couple of theories as to why Greenland is so important to Trump. National security is not one of them, because there's nothing that the United States can't do now that they would do if Greenland were a protectorate or just part of the United States. So, you ask why all of this is happening. I think part of it is just dictator envy. Part of it, I think, is somebody putting in his head about the Monroe Doctrine, which I want to be clear again, was an early 19th century doctrine that basically was very limited to that time, saying effectively that they don't want Spain and Great Britain using the Western Hemisphere to launch attacks on the United States. It was augmented. I think what he's talking about is the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. It was augmented by Teddy Roosevelt in the early part of the 20th century, also over 100 years ago, that said that we would reserve the right to use military force to be able to do what we wanted to do to keep the Western Hemisphere at our beck and call. Interestingly, in 1932, at Franklin Roosevelt's inaugural, he got rid of that policy and created the good neighbor policy, basically saying we're going to treat our neighbors like good neighbors. We haven't always lived up to that, but the reality is we have tried. Or maybe sometimes we haven't tried, but at least that was kind of the policy, whether we lived up to it or not. Trump is basically throwing all that out. And this is not so much about Trump behaving like a early or late 19th century empire building person that you had in the Ottoman Empire or the Russian Empire for that matter, or the British Empire. He's behaving like a medieval absolute monarch is how he wants to behave. So I think part of it is that, but I think the other part of this is that he just doesn't know what he doesn't know. And Marco Rubio and all of these neocons have put these ideas into his head that this is what you have to do. So he went from being the guy who promised no foreign wars and no foreign intervention and focusing exclusively on the United States to now basically becoming a neocon. I mean, this is the equivalent of anything Paul Wolfowitz did or anybody else did. Now he's saying Iraq would have been good if we had kept the oil. Well, how many people died in Iraq so that we would have kept the oil? And this oil is it's going to be, the oil companies don't want to go in there because it's going to take decades to stabilize and update their infrastructure. It's totally decayed. That's one. Two, it's not like people in Venezuela are going to suddenly lie down and say, okay, come on in. Great. We'll help you. I mean, there's going to be a whole bunch of, these narco terrorists, quote unquote, who have been running the country, according to Donald Trump, are still there running the country. So what are we saying? Go ahead. Like, why did we blow up all of those alleged narco boats off the coast of Venezuela? Why did we do that? If this was about the oil, because we're leaving the people in charge who are continuing to empower these same people. Why is it that Maduro was so bad that we had to extract him and bring him basically in chains to New York City, where Olga and I are, but not bad enough that we are sending Venezuelans who fled his regime back to Venezuela? I mean, these are all questions that nobody's in the mainstream media I'm seeing ask. But,
And honestly, my sense is bigger than, some grand conspiracy, because I remember when Trump came into office in 2017, I remember it was towards the beginning of his first term, like literally months into his first term, where he was threatening to take Venezuela. And I remember the Russians going absolutely nuts around that time, because at that time they actually did have the capacity and they had people inside the country. They had Wagner, that was the functioning mercenary group. Now it's kind of splintered into the Africa Corps, and it's basically splintered groups under Russia's defense ministry, but not the same of what Wagner was, in 2017, 2016, 18, 19, up to basically the death of Prigozhin. So-called death of Prigozhin. And so, hey, Claude, I remember the Russians then, and I'm curious who, I mean, with Trump, you never know because it could be as simple as something Maduro said in 2015 or 14 or 16, maybe mocked him. And this is why, because it's not about democracy. I mean, he made that very clear. And I will have to say the only, thing that I would give Trump credit for is that unlike other Republicans who actually sit there and create these, false pretenses to invade a country, as Bush did with this WMD, and they go through all the trouble fabricating evidence and, and whatnot. Trump didn't even bother. He didn't bother saying it's for oil, for nothing. For drugs or for democracy, nothing. He's like, no, I'm here for the oil. That's the only reason I'm here. And he made it very clear. So, I mean, no one really has to, sit and figure out exactly what it is because he's telling you exactly what he's doing and why he's doing it. And I wish people, paid more attention because even we're going to talk about Greenland in a bit. Same thing. He was floating Greenland since 2019 or 2018 is when he wanted to buy Greenland or acquire Greenland, you know, by any means. The difference then is that he actually had people around him who, quote unquote, were the babysitters and the so called adults in the room who kept him from doing this. Plus, he didn't have full control of the Republican Party at that time. Now, that's it. I mean, there's no guardrails whatsoever. And, his wildest things, whatever he wants tomorrow, if he says, I want to, mobilize and invade Canada, no one's going to stop him. Republicans will sit there like, penguins nodding, and that's it. There's zero minus one or two, zero pushback. And no one around him will stop, and every single agency has been hijacked with him installing a subservient at the top who's like, yes boss, whatever you want. So this is the difference now, that he can act out on all these things that he wanted to the first time around, and no one paid mind to him.
It's interesting because you have a bunch of senators on both sides of the aisle who are like, especially on the Republican side of the aisle, who are like, no, 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 invading Greenland, using military force in Greenland is crazy, and Trump shouldn't do it, and he's not a fool, and John Kennedy. I mean, everybody. Tom Till is John Kennedy. All of these people saying that, and I find that fascinating because I have a theory. I have two theories as to why Trump wants Greenland. One, stupid, and the other, nefarious. The stupid reason I think he wants Greenland is because he has dictator envy, and he looked at a map, and if you look at that map and you combine the United States and Greenland, it is a bigger landmass than Russia is. And that would make the United States the biggest country in the world. And of course, Trump is all about size. I'm not going to question why, but he's all about size. And so looking at a map, you would see the stars and stripes being a lot more than any other country if, in fact, we were to annex Greenland. Canada might be part of that calculus too. Then we'd really be by far the biggest country on Earth. But I think Greenland's an easier thing for him than Canada. So I think stupidly somebody showed him a map of what the United States would look like and compared it to Russia if Greenland were part of the American landmass. So that's stupid. The nefarious reason for this is because he can't get out of NATO legally.
Exactly.
And I think that's what this is all about. He cannot get out of NATO legally, so he's going to get out of NATO this way. Because after he attacks potentially any NATO country, especially Denmark, either Denmark invokes Article 5 or the alliance just falls apart from within, and it's already falling apart from within.
Yeah.
I interviewed, Michelle and I interviewed Senator Andy Kim a couple days ago, and I asked him explicitly, I said, is NATO dead? And he said, it's not dead yet, but it's, I'm paraphrasing, but basically it's very, very sick. And he said that he hears from our allies all the time, people in very high positions in leadership in our ally countries who are saying, what the fuck is going on? Like, what has happened to the United States? And so I think part of that is, I mean, it's fascinating, but there is there is something that's interesting about this, is that he cannot unilaterally pull the United States out of NATO.
No.
So the North Atlantic, just for people who don't know, the North Atlantic Treaty is ratified under federal law. He can't withdraw it from that treaty without either 2/3 of the Senate or an act of Congress authorizing that withdrawal. He's never going to get 2/3 of the Senate or an act of Congress to do this. And in 2024, this was codified as part of the National Defense Authorization Act, which bars unilateral NATO withdrawal by any president, precisely because lawmakers were worried about the prospect of Trump attempting it. So, that's the problem. Since he can't do it legally, he's just going to do it kind of as a wedge, right?
I mean, more than a wedge. If you attack a NATO country and you're a NATO country, NATO no longer exists. Which, again, look, if NATO doesn't exist because of this, the only thing I can say is that, the framework for NATO is there, and literally NATO can reconstitute pretty much how the KGB, after the collapse, went to FSB and SVR. NATO can become, PATO minus the United States. And just, if anything, frankly, if I were European countries and Canada, I'd add Japan and South Korea into the mix. I have to say I was bored with a friend of mine from Ukraine, and we sat on the phone the other night, and we were basically calculating not only the wealth between European, if you add Europe, South Korea, Japan, and Canada, but also the size. And literally this would, put our military, I mean, if you compare all the population and the military of that, it would be, we basically, they can get along without the United States perfectly fine. So if the US, is the threat to Europe, which it is right now, it is a very big threat to Europe's national security, not just from threatening to attack and annex Greenland, but also from the fact of basically putting on in writing that we're going to overthrow every democratic government in Europe, and prop up all the far right parties, and use all the tools, the CIA and everything else, at our disposal to do so. So, I mean, right now the U.S. under Trump is a threat to Europe, and the framework for NATO is there, and worst case, they literally, it would be horrible. I mean, it would be heartbreaking and horrible to see, US, I mean, Europe have to shut down US bases to tell American troops after, 70 plus year alliance, that you have to leave. We don't trust you on our soil. I mean, the whole thing would be heartbreaking. And Republicans in Congress really, really, better think about that scenario and the humiliation for United States, because Europe does have leverage. Everyone paints America as, the one who controls everything. Europe can dump their debt, U.S. debt, and throw our economy into a tailspin. They can close all U.S. bases, so they do have leverage, and we don't need to go that far. And Congress really can, basically put into writing that no, we cannot, attack Greenland. We cannot buy Greenland unless the Danes say we can, and the Greenlanders, most importantly. And that's it. So we'll see what happens with that. One thing I wanted to mention, yes, I saw a comment with Fiona Hill, and I saw this conspiracy going around the whole weekend. Yes, Fiona Hill did say in 2019 that there were discussions that, Trump would give Putin Ukraine, and in return Putin would give Venezuela to Trump. Just to make something clear, and I don't know, why it's it's so hard, I guess, with conspiracy, this is how it becomes. Russia has shown its strength which is not much right now, especially after its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I mean, it really cannot do nothing. And Ukraine is not Trump's to give. And for people who are not aware, Ukraine and Russia have been fighting before the United States even existed. I mean, literally, you can go back a few centuries prior to the founding of the United States and see that, at many different points, the Russian Empire and Ukraine went to war. So the fact that, like people think that Trump is going to say, Ukraine is Putin's. He could say, that anything is France is Putin's, and offer, Russia, France, or Germany. That doesn't mean he can deliver, because Ukrainians have shown, and they will continue fighting with, and I said it even prior to the full-scale invasion, that Ukrainians will fight with broomsticks. I mean, they literally, the thought of being under Russian occupation, like, people will do anything never to go there. Same for Estonians and Polish and Lithuanians and Latvians and anyone who's ever been under Russian occupation. Um, Especially the older generations, very clearly remember what that was like. For Ukrainians, they have people in Crimea and parts of Donbass who have been under Russian occupation now, literally next month, 12 years. They see what's happening there, the concentration camps, the torture, everything, the erasure of, Ukrainian heritage and language and culture. So there is absolutely no way. So Trump can promise Putin whatever he wants. Just because he promises it to him doesn't mean it will happen, because Ukraine, not Zelensky, not Trump, no one can hand Ukraine over to Russia unless the Ukrainian people come together and say, we want to surrender, and everything that we fought for, whatever, literally centuries, we want to give up, and that's it, and we're just going to go under Russian occupation. So don't worry about Ukraine. Ukrainians will continue fighting, and Ukrainians, are beyond grateful to US and Europe for everything they've done, but Ukrainians also are under no illusion of US and Europe, only for the fact they've been betrayed so many times, particularly with the Budapest Memorandum and in 94, and then in 14 when they got invaded, everyone basically looked the other way. That they've been doing everything since the full-scale invasion to make themselves less reliant on the United States and on Europe. And this is why you see all these drones productions and long-range missiles and, mid-range missiles, because they're trying to put themselves in a position that they never have to rely on anyone, and they can fight back by themselves.
It's interesting. Interesting is probably not the word, but apparently now, according to Lindsey Graham, Trump has turned on Putin. I don't believe that for 1 second. I'm not sure what this Russian sanctions bill is all about. That Lindsey Graham says that the Senate is now going to pass, and the House is going to apparently pass, and Trump is going to sign, because they've gotten the green light from Trump to do that. I'm not clear as to why they didn't just pass it before and dare him to veto it and then override it, because I think they had the votes to do that. But nevertheless, I guess Daddy's given permission, so they're going to allegedly, according to Lindsey Graham, impose sanctions on Russia. I don't, do I think this is some kind of leverage that they've are dangling out the prospect of doing that, which is why they told Lindsey Graham to dangle it out? I think Lindsey Graham's kind of a useful idiot here. I think he really believes that this is going to happen. I'm skeptical. I think this is a message that the administration is trying to send to Putin. Interesting that Trump has now allegedly deployed Wyckoff to start talking to the Ukrainians. And interesting that they seized this Russian tanker off the coast of Venezuela. None of these things is a coincidence. And I don't know, Olga, what you make of all of
them. Two tankers yesterday.
Russian flagged, I should say Russian flag tankers.
Yeah.
What do you make of all this? Because to me, this is a bait and switch, and I don't believe for 1 second that he's ever going to have a breakup with Putin for a number of reasons. But what do you think this is all about?
I can't tell you myself what it's about. I do think that he's trying to show some kind of, muscle, because look, Trump has positioned himself to a point that he really does control the base. You're seeing a huge fracture within the base, and it's breaking up into the, anti-Israel, anti-Semite crowd. I mean, it's crazy that it's combined, but unfortunately, this is how it's falling. Not only are they criticizing the MAGA Israel, but they're also putting that it's a Jewish conspiracy behind everything, and that the Jews control the United States and it's a client state. And then you have the other MAGA pro-Trump crowd, and each item that happens, each thing that happens, and we'll get into Iran, further splits this, and and fractures this MAGA movement. But the people who trust Trump, whatever leverage Russia has, and we said this before, Trump has such a control. I mean, literally, they could release videos of him raping kids, and Trump will say fake news, and and his the people who follow him will continue to follow him and say, this is hey, call it fake and fabricated, and you see Russia's attacking Trump or whatever the case is. So now he has for a while this leverage, and again, for Russia, this was humiliating yesterday. I mean, I can't begin to tell you how humiliating it was and how angry they were, to the point that you had, one member of Duma, one of the higher senators, who basically threatened to nuke the United States for
Uh,
this.
they threaten to nuke the United States every day. So
I know. You had another one who threatened that we need to start bombing U.S. ships in international waters. I mean, they were furious. The military propagandists, especially coming off of Venezuela, were, I mean, really, like, are getting to a point that yesterday, it was like, I'm waiting for them to storm the Kremlin and drag Putin out, because here you have Russia, who very publicly in their media said that we've sent, a diplomatic request not to touch the ship. They then sent submarine and the Russian Navy to escort the ship. I mean, so not only did they send the diplomatic request, but they sent, a submarine and the Navy to escort the ship back to Russia's, area. And then you have literally a scene on all social media playing out of the Russian Navy, and then Americans dropping down to see the ship. And for Russia, this is not good. I mean, because really, that shows the effectiveness that they cannot even, protect the ships, and these shadow fleets is what they rely on. Also, interestingly enough, again, I don't know if why Russians are seizing, were so concerned for this particular ship, but it went from Iran to Venezuela. It was on the way to Venezuela and then back. There was another shadow fleet ship, part of Russia's shadow fleet, that Ukrainians sunk a few months ago. And what was found on this ship was that it was carrying nuclear reactors to North Korea. So the Russians are not only using their shadow fleet to bypass sanctions and move oil to India, China, and whatnot, but they're also using the shadow fleet to move around apparently nuclear components for North Korea's nuclear program. I assume the same for Iran's nuclear program, which Russia has been very instrumental over the past decade in helping prop up and build and, weaponize it into actual, nuclear missiles and not just domestic, for domestic consumption. And with Venezuela, they're constantly moving weapons. So I don't know what happened. Whatever it is, the Russians were fuming yesterday, and then this was as another. Ship got seized yesterday because it was the Bella slash Marinara and then the Sophia. Um, I don't know what's happening with Trump. I don't know why he suddenly changed on Putin. I don't know if this is temporary until Putin gets, him on the phone again and compliments him, and then he falls back under his spell. But at this moment, whatever it is, he definitely there's a rift. And the Russians are also furious with the upcoming Iran attack, which could happen literally any day now. I mean, the Americans are positioning themselves, the Israelis are positioning themselves. There are reports that the Russians are evacuating, the Turks are evacuating from the region. So there looks to be something, happening with Iran. And then that would really be like the final death blow to Russia because they lose another important client, which is Iran, who has been instrumental in basically everything. And then they're left with North
Well,
Korea and China.
I don't know that I agree with that, because you have, on the one hand, you've got that. On the other hand, you have China and India that
Yeah.
are getting increasingly close to Russia. And if I had to trade Iran for China, I'll take it, right? If I'm Putin. I mean, the Iranians are a foothold in the Middle East. They obviously lost Syria, but if I'm Xi Jinping, I've got to be watching what Trump is doing, and I've got to be thinking two things. One, this is the best thing that ever happened to me, because if Trump wants his sphere of influence in the West, I'm going to have my sphere of influence in the East. The second thing I would say is, if I am the Russians, who are very good at this, all of this is not organic, what's happening with MAGA. This anti-Semitism, this anti-Israel stuff, which I'm separating those two because there's legitimate criticisms to be made of how Netanyahu policies, but let's be very clear, you also have Holocaust deniers, who are the fastest growing podcast in the country right now, is Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes. These aren't people who are not just anti-Israel, they're literally anti-Semites. And a lot of other people have come. Tucker Carlson have come perilously close to being anti-Semites, and I'm putting that aside from the Israel stuff. But the Russians are very good at taking this germ of this little cancer, whether it's anti-Semitism or anti-Israel stuff, and then accelerating the spread through social media, through bots, through the usual stuff that you and I talked about in our active measures series as to how they won the 2016 election for Trump. And I have to believe that Trump is in a race against time, because on the one hand, you have Trump interfering in Venezuela now. Okay, you have people like J.D. Vance saying, no, this isn't regime change, and no, this isn't foreign adventurism because it's taking place in our own hemisphere. Okay, I mean, crazy, but okay, they'll accept that. Greenland, okay, we need it for national security. Okay, but then you get to Iran. And they're not even pretending that it's that Iran has nukes that are going to be able to reach the United States, because that's the same excuse that we heard about Iraq, right? And it's not to say that Iran doesn't have a nuclear program. It does. It does not have capability of reaching the United States. It does have capability of reaching Israel. And that's where MAGA becomes incensed, because in their mind, wait a second, we don't really give a shit if Iran nukes a bunch of Jews in Israel. And why are we going to war for them? That's how MAGA thinks about it. And you'll see that acceleration happening with I believe, the help of Russian bots and Russian trolls. And so in that sense, Trump is kind of up against the clock here. He's got people whispering in his ear that he could be the greatest president in the history of the country. He already thinks he is, but he could be even greater, because he's going to take out all of these dictators in one fell swoop and expand the map of the United States. It's going to be like the Louisiana Purchase, but this time it'll be the Greenland Purchase. And on the other hand, you have a bunch of you have people like Marco Rubio obviously whispering that in his ear. And on the other hand, you have people like his base And you saw that very much at the Turning Point USA conference in December with the America Fest, where you had Nancy, I was about to call her Nancy Kerrigan. I don't know where that came from. Erica Kirk. Uh, Erica Kirk, sorry, Nancy Kerrigan. Erica Kirk standing up at opening up the conference and then giving the second spot I thought was interesting to Ben Shapiro. And Ben Shapiro did something very interesting, which Ben Shapiro actually said, let's talk about ideology, not identity. We have a shared ideology, and this ideology includes not being anti-Semites. He got booed. He got booed. Every other person that came up on stage afterwards, whether it was Tucker, whether it was Megyn Kelly, whether it was anybody else, Steve Bannon, all of them basically kicked Ben Shapiro out of the club because he had the temerity to say, hey, we don't really, anti-Semites don't belong here. So you see where the base is going.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not going to want to go into Iran for regime change, yet another Middle Eastern adventure, which is going to be a lot harder than Iraq, because Iran is just much bigger. And to the extent that, we think we're going to be greeted as liberators, I mean, do you really think that we are going to be greeted as liberators? There are people who hate this regime. There are people who hated Saddam's regime. I mean, we will need to put military boots on the ground to keep the peace in Iran, because then if we don't, the Chinese will come in, the Russians will come in and sabotage the whole thing. Same thing in Venezuela. I mean, these oil companies are coming in. Who's protecting them? Who's protecting them? And Megyn Kelly, I thought, had a very interesting point, which is she said, I have I think a 14-year-old son and a 12-year-old son. I forgot what she said, a 16-year-old son and a 12-year-old son. And, is it my kids who are going to be fighting these wars? So that's where Trump, I think, is going to have problems. And I think the Russians are going to accelerate that for him on social media and with all their, listen, Tucker Carlson has a direct line to the Kremlin. Megyn Kelly interviewed Putin. There are, these are not people who don't have a direct line to either Putin or to people close to him.
And just to add, the Russians have been messing with Trump. I mean, first of all, let's remember when Trump came back to power, the first time I remember being up when Hillary Clinton conceded and watching, all Russian news. And they literally, I'm not kidding, literally, not figuratively, took out champagne glasses and toasted in the Duma. Literally. They celebrated Trump's win to power and whatnot. Interestingly, in 24, when he came back last year, the first thing they did was put Melania half naked and say, oh, here, ladies and gentlemen, here's your first lady of America, with her in practically like nothing on. And this was plastered across their big, from floor to ceiling TV screens. The second thing they did is issue a series of threats. Gee, we hope you don't get assassinated. And this went from every high official, from Putin to Patrushev, who was head of the Security Council, National Security Council, former head of Russia's security services, to Medvedev, the former president slash prime minister, right? Prime minister. And whatnot, to literally everyone. They all threatened Trump and said, gee, we hope you don't get assassinated. We hope your American security services can protect you and whatnot. And then things were calm after Trump started, bashing Zelensky, humiliating Ukraine, betraying Europe after the Oval Office meeting. I mean, they've really capitalized and used all of Trump's actions towards Ukraine as propaganda for domestic purposes. But then came June, and I don't know what happened in June, but we all know that Elon Musk is another direct line to the Kremlin. And out of nowhere, randomly, when no one, like literally, not one person, minus the Epstein, like people who have been working on Epstein for a decade or so, No one was thinking about Epstein, and randomly Elon Musk comes out and says Trump is in the Epstein files. This is what fueled this. I mean, really, prior to Elon Musk saying this, no one was thinking about Epstein at that moment. MAGA was, because they had Pam Bondi. Yes, I have the files on my desk. I'm going to release it. They were invited to the how you call it, White House, and given binders of public clippings and whatnot. But it was Elon Musk who suddenly, randomly, out of nowhere, uh, f- dropped that Trump is in the Epstein files, Steve Bannon is in the Epstein files, and this is why they don't want them released. This was 2 weeks before Israel started attacking Iran. And at that point, Russia was doing everything. I mean, I've never seen Putin call Trump so many times, but he was calling Trump literally for his birthday, for everything, to try to do everything to stop Israel from attacking Iran and bombing Iran. And then comes Trump, who decides, okay, the U.S. will bomb Iran. And you saw this back and forth of Trump and Putin calling, then Trump saying, no, maybe I'm not going to bomb Iran. No, no, diplomacy. And then suddenly he has a meeting with the Israelis. Yeah, the U.S. will, and back and forth and whatnot. And from there, that's where you see Russia really escalating to break this base, because then once the U.S. started bombing Iran, that's when you had the likes of Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and all of these others who started coming out, and you saw the base split more and more, to the point that they turned everything into, and that's why I say there's very legitimate criticism of Netanyahu. I mean, we can have, a whole year worth of shows on it. But this was not it. This was specifically, it's Israel who is protecting Epstein, and this is why the files are not out. It's Israel who controls Trump, and he's just a puppet dangling. And same thing with JD Vance. And these are the, conspiracies that were spread. And at the same time, you see it just accelerating since then. It has not gone away, and each thing that happens, you see more and more. And it's not, generic, well, not generic, organic activity, because you see the same pattern of bots and trolls who are amplifying this. I remember it was uh, even when Israel bombed Iran, I remember like Republican Congress people basically said, "Oh, we are here. We stand with Israel, for their security and blah blah." And for each Republican comment, 15 retweets, you saw 1,000 comments, fuck Israel, blah, 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 and carrying on and on and on and on. And I mean, you saw this pattern, you saw the same phrasing, and clearly saw that it was bot activity. And from there, it continued. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see where it goes. But, with Trump, I'm sure someone, especially a Lindsey Graham, would have gone in his ear and told him, like, oh, by the way, the Russians are threatening to nuke you. One called for Trump's assassination. They said it's time for us to take out the orange pedophile and put him to sleep for good. I mean, this is this was yesterday after the seizure of the ship, not Maduro, but the ship. Um, so they are not handling it well. And at the same time, they're already preparing, about Iran and losing Iran. And yes, they do have North Korea and China. And yes, those are instrumental. But don't forget, it was the Iranians first. I mean, from Soviet days. This is a decades long partnership and strategic alliance. And it was the Iranians who were the first ones to come to their aid and send, the IRGC to Ukraine to train Russians with the Shahed, drones, and to provide them the Shahed drones and the ballistic missiles and everything. This was when China at that point didn't really want to be involved, so for Russia to hey call betray Iran, it will be interesting. And last point I'll make on this, um, this doesn't look good for Russia either, because they've walked around and acted like a superpower, and that, they have some kind of sphere of influence, and they've attempted to expand BRICS, and they had their fake NATO, the CSTO, which was a fake version of NATO, and tried to wave around their muscle. This is literally now going to be the fifth time that one of their um proxy states signs a defense agreement with them and military cooperation agreement, and Russia has not held up with one. Not with Armenia a few years ago, not with Iran last year, not with Venezuela this year, when the Venezuelans and Maduro was literally begging Putin for help. And literally, they just sent a few months ago, to renew and sign the strategic military cooperation, and not with Syria, and not with Iran. So can you imagine if you're Russia and you're sitting there and promising military and strategic defense cooperation? um their agreements are worth what the ruble was after the collapse of the Soviet Union, which is basically cleaning your ass with it, because they're not there. And for their reputation, this is not good, because it just shows that no normal country is going to say yes, we're going to wait for Russia to come in, and have like a strategic alliance with us to protect us in the thing of an attack, in the event of an attack.
It's interesting that you say this, because on the one hand, yes. On the other hand, I think that Russia basically is winning the Cold War, because they have installed somebody in the United States government, at the top of the United States government. And to be clear, they did install him. If you don't believe us, you can go to either Olga's or my Substack and read our 20-part series, which is really book length, about how they interfered in the election. It's called Active Measures for people who are new to the show. But, the United States, until the PAX Americana, which the show is named after, which we might have to change the name of the show because the PAX Americana is certainly about to collapse. But, the beauty of NATO and the beauty of our alliances is that they were all voluntary. We have bases in places like Saudi Arabia because the Saudis want us to keep bases there. We have bases in Japan because Japan wanted us to keep bases there, because Japan didn't really want to have a fighting army, so they relied on us for security against China, among other people. Germany, and so on. And some of these go back to the end of World War II, and some of them are newer. But the reality is we do have bases all over the world that are there not because by virtue of conquest, but by virtue of the locals wanting us there to protect them. And NATO, unlike the Warsaw Pact, was not coercive. Everybody who's in NATO is in NATO because they want to be in NATO. All of that is about to collapse. I mean, NATO, for all intents and purposes, may struggle on, right? But it's kind of, to quote a phrase from prior to World War I, it's kind of now the sick man of Europe, in the sense that it exists on paper. But the truth of the matter is, when the biggest and most powerful nation in NATO is now about to talking about invading another country, a much smaller country in NATO, and you have people who represent other NATO countries. I mean, what you saw this week was you had the Prime Minister of Great Britain, or United Kingdom, excuse me, certainly the Prime Minister of Denmark, the Prime Minister of the President of France, the Prime Minister of Italy, the Prime Minister of Poland, the Chancellor of Germany, all issuing a joint letter saying, United States, get your hands off of Greenland. These are all NATO countries. I mean, what does this say? Interestingly, it's interesting who signed it and who didn't sign it. But nevertheless, these are all the major powers in NATO, the big players in NATO: France, the UK, the United Kingdom. I mean, these are the kind of the big three in Europe. And interesting that Canada did not sign that, but okay, even though they're not European, but still a big NATO country for obvious reasons. So to me, NATO is effectively on life support. And the United States itself, in terms of our governance, is on life support. in that you have a president who's joking about canceling elections, and we all know Donald Trump does not joke. We have a president who is murdering people in the streets, as we saw yesterday. Nothing is going well for this country, and nothing is going well for our transnational alliances. And so you wonder, did we win the Cold War? Is Russia on its
No.
last legs? I don't know. I mean, what you make a very compelling point. On the other hand, what I just said, I think, is also a little bit of something to consider, which is I think the Russians are kind of sitting pretty because their number one enemy, which is us, which is basically the country that stabilized the world, is completely unstable and destabilized. We're on the cusp of a civil war here.
I agree with you. I mean, as far as Russia, there, I hate to, use this analogy, but their operations, they behave like termites. They like get into, spread everywhere, get into it, start
Yeah.
eating away, and that's it. Um, so yes, I agree. Definitely we didn't win the Cold War. I mean, that was evident when we couldn't defend ourselves against the 2016 election attack, when Europe couldn't defend itself against every single attack. Um, uh, that's still ongoing. Russia is excellent with, these shadow war operations, with information warfare, with, cyber attacks, blowing up, hateful railways, with these plausible deniability attacks, with, infiltrating institutions. I mean, pretty much the KGB playbook, recruiting people, uh, having people basically on their payroll working against, their own government, their own national security. This is what they're good with. Who's going to ultimately win? Will be, I mean, this I'm not ready yet to determine, only because we're on life support, they're on life support, because they literally have lost 1.5 million people. Now Putin is losing face domestically. And how many times have we said that, it's not going to be that Putin is committing genocide against Ukrainians that will piss off the Russians. It will be when he starts can defend Russia's interest and looks incompetent. And sure enough, for 4 years, the world has witnessed, we're on the verge of a 12 years since Russia invaded Ukraine, but for 4 years it's been very public, and we're watching atrocities on a daily basis of what is happening inside of Ukraine. That hasn't moved the needle domestically inside of Russia, but Putin watching American forces sees a ship in front of the Russian Navy, and Russia not being able to stop it, and all the other things that are happening with, for instance, Venezuela next to Iran and whatnot. That's beginning to move the needle. Plus, their economy is on life support, so we're right now. It's like two turtles who are coming for the, crawling to the finish line of who's going to collapse first. And I think, right now it's yet to see. I have more faith in the American people any day than the Russians, because Russia will continue going down its path of collapse, whereas the American people at a point will say enough is enough. And, Americans are known for revolutions. They've had them, they've gotten complacent over the past several decades, since the civil rights movement. But I think when push comes to shove, you will see, lines being crossed where they're like, enough. This is not the country we want. This is not how we want to be governed. And we have to ignore what is happening online, because you go on social media, it delivers and regurgitates the same 5 people or 10, MAGA accounts who make you think that that's it, the whole country is like this. When in reality, I can promise you, I'm sure the majority of people, after watching, what ICE have been doing, this woman getting murdered by ICE, and then seeing Christy Nome stand there and lie to, the face of the American people, saying that no, nothing happened. Like she's the one who attempted to run over this cop and kill him, and ICE agent and whatnot. Um, so it's yet to see how this plays out, but I do have faith in the American people, and I do think, I mean, we are seeing by poll numbers, we're seeing by like election results. I mean, literally, I saw before yesterday, South Carolina special election, like the Democrat lost by 14 votes. 14.
Yeah,
14 or 12 or something like that.
yeah.
Um, so people are standing up, people are getting more and more fed up. And I do think, that we have a better chance of actually getting control of this country. I'm hoping. And definitely a better chance than the Russians. I mean, the Russians, the only time that they've ever risen up, and it was after the fall of the Soviet Union. That's it. That was the one
I mean,
time.
the Russians have, I mean, look, the Russians have absolutely risen up before, right? They rose up in 1905 after the fall, after
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
Japanese. They rose up certainly in 1917 after what seemed like close to a loss in World War One. So they can't take losses. I mean, Putin will. That's why Putin has to win this war, and that's why he's
Hmm.
humiliated. And if the United States wants regime change without its fingerprints on it in Russia, which I don't believe Trump for a minute wants, but if he does want it, then one way to do it is to just have these kinds of humiliations happen over and over again, and to help Ukraine win or repel Russia. Because if that's the case, then Putin's a dead man. Now, we don't know who Trump has this personal relationship with in Russia and why he keeps doing Russia's bidding. It's obviously somebody. I mean, we've always assumed
Hmm.
it's Putin, but is it Putin or is it somebody else? And is that somebody else? Are their interests diverging with Putin or not? I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I don't want to go down these rabbit holes. But there's no doubt in my mind that Trump's admiration of Russia is not just about admiration of Russia. It is about something much more, going back to the mid '80s. And who is it exactly who he admires there so much?
And it's funny you say that, and not to be a conspiracy theorist, but in the mid 1980s, Trump was absolutely obsessed with Gorbachev. I mean, beyond obsessed. He
Yeah.
was so obsessed with Gorbachev. He's the best and whatnot. And I had pointed it out, and I'm shocked it went over so many people's heads at the time. But not at that time, but like in recent years. But he was obsessed with Gorbachev, and then the KGB had turned against Gorbachev in the late '80s, and they started Khrushchev started planning the coup against Gorbachev and whatnot. And Trump, mind you, a random real estate guy who was a playboy, who was on the cover and constantly in page 6 from all his which is the New York Post, right? New York Post or Daily News, page 6.
Page 6 is New York Post. New York Post.
Okay. The New York Post, like the gossip columns. He was always on, in them from his affairs and this and that. And I mean, he was constantly occupied the local media in New York.
Yep.
So you had him, a random, real estate guy who suddenly in like it must have been 1989, comes out and starts attacking Gorbachev. Now, this is at the same exact time that the KGB was secretly planning a coup against Gorbachev, of which eventually they did, temporarily put him under house arrest, and then revert, and then ended up, it was a very short-lived coup. But who gave this information to Trump? How did he go from being obsessed with Gorbachev to the point that he even announced, "Oh, Gorbachev is coming to Trump Towers," and it ended up being like Gorbachev like a fill-in, like in Vegas how they have those stand-ins.
Yeah.
Um, And it was a fake Gorbachev who came, and he thought it was a real one, and he came and all proud and excited. How did he go from there to suddenly criticizing Gorbachev for being weak and using literally the same talking points that at the time the KGB did? So it is interesting, and definitely thought food for thought on what is happening now. But again, with Trump, you know, this is like palace intrigue, watching what's happening, and it is really interesting to see. And we see him shifting back and forth to Russia, away from Russia, back to Russia, away from Russia. um but at the end of the day, the serious people in Europe need to make their short-term and long-term planning. Sadly, need to prepare for a potential US invasion and a face-off, of the French and German and Danish troops fighting American troops, in over Greenland. So I mean, in reality, still, the Europe needs to strengthen its position and take its own, precautionary measures in the case. And we have a lot of work to do here. And I think we need to, frankly, over Greenland, I don't know how enticing it is to get people to call Congress, but I wish, it was an area where we can, mobilize the movement and people have people call Republicans and say, like, what are you doing? Like, how are you going to support an attack on an ally? Because it's absurd. If something like this ever happened in Ukraine, I can tell you Ukrainians would be out in the streets. They wouldn't leave until this position gets changed. Because if Ukraine ever threatened, like, oh, we're going to attack Estonia or we're going to attack Moldova, the Ukrainian people would not sit there and say, oh, okay, no problem. They would come out and be like, absolutely not, over our dead body are you attacking, one of our sister countries and our allies.
Yeah,
So
I
I
mean,
wish we could do something here and mobilize people to at least call Congress, because, this is going to hurt everyone. I mean, besides the fact that Americans aren't going to be welcomed into Europe, because if that should that happen, good luck landing in any European airport. They'll look at an American passport, be like, nope, denied, go back. But it's just for long term, our reputation, and this is not what Americans fought and died, for these alliances to fight fascism. Like, this is not what they did it for. So we can then, 70 years later, try to illegally invade an ally that has nothing to do with us.
go to the American Cemetery in Normandy if you want to see what we fought for, and then think about what's happening now. It's really astounding, to be honest. I don't know how else to describe it. And the fact that you have a know nothing president who has no idea about any history and doesn't care, and is influenced on the one hand by these neocons, whether it's Lindsey Graham in his ear or it's Marco Rubio in his ear, on the one hand, on the other hand, influenced by these MAGA America Firsters who are anti-Semites and don't want any, the Marjorie Taylor Greene wing, although he's on the outs with her, but the Tucker Carlson wing and people like that. It's interesting. And then you have Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly doing a podcast either yesterday or today talking about how Nick Fuentes is a good guy. So there you go, and makes a lot of good points.
And you have Miller. Don't forget the Miller interview, that we're a strong country and we'll invade whoever we want to.
Yeah. So there you go. So on that note, Olga, we've been at this for a while, and we should pick this up again next week. And for people who are asking, I know a few people emailed over the holidays. You liked our series and you liked our seminars. We will be back in the early part of this year with all of that as well. So look out for that. We just have to get together, and now the holidays are over, and figure it out. And good to see everybody. Olga, great to see you after all these weeks.
You too.
I
know.
And we'll see everybody next week. Thanks,
and everyone watching, please let us help us keep this show name Pax Americana. Call your Congress people, please.
All your Congress people. The Senate right now, at this very moment, the Senate right now is voting on a war powers resolution with Venezuela that might actually pass. It looks like Susan Collins is voting for it. Looks like a few other senators might be voting for it. Slight possibility it might pass. So let's see what happens there. But, we'll see what happens. All right.
We'll see.
All right,
Who
everybody.
knows? Next week, who knows? By next week, we might have invaded another 5 countries. Who
Yeah,
knows?
we'll see if Iran is still standing by next week. We'll see what's going on. Lots
Yeah.
happened. Lots happened in the last few days since they knew
Yep.
a lot more will happen. Okay, everybody. We'll see you soon. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.